Are we about to see a new and explosive release of NSA information? And here's an even bigger question. Has another source come forward, possibly inspired by Edward Snowden? Let me back up a moment here and clarify. Glenn Greenwald is the reporter who first broke the Edward Snowden surveillance story and who helped Snowden publish all of those NSA revelations that have shaken U.S. relationships around the world and revealed to all of us just how extensively the government is collecting our personal data. He'll be joining me in a moment as he prepares to release material we have not seen yet before on his new website. Meanwhile, Greenwald is preparing to come back to the United States in spite of the fact that he could be arrested as soon as he lands. Several lawmakers have said that he may be guilty of aiding and abetting a felon. Journalist Glenn Greenwald joins me now from Rio de Janeiro. Glenn, thank you for being here. I'm not sure if I can hear Glenn, but I think you can hear me. So I'm going to try to ask you my first question. And it involves your new website, which is going to be coming online in a couple of days. Will you be revealing new information about these surveillance stories on the site?
Sure, there's a lot more really significant stories left to reveal, as we've said for quite some time. That continues to be true, and a big part of why this appeals to us so much, namely the opportunity to build a new website, a new media outlet really, is to be able to continue aggressively reporting on these materials that have informed democratic debates around the world.
And are all of the stories you'll be publishing starting this week all based on the Snowden documents, or have new sources come forward?
Well, I can't really talk about the stories until they're published, including their bases, but I would say just in general that before the Snowden reporting began, one of the recognitions, I think, on the part of the American media was that the Obama administration has been particularly aggressive, some have said, and I would agree, vindictive, in going after sources and even journalists themselves. James Goodall, the former New York Times general counsel, said that President Obama is more hostile to basic press freedoms than any president since Richard Nixon. And so I think one of the things that sources need to know is that if they do come forward, they're going to be defended and protected, and also that whatever they come forward to reveal is going to be aggressively reported by media outlets and by journalists, even if the government doesn't like it. And I think journalists know that about us, and I think that some will be willing to work with us.
Some sources, you mean? It sounds like you do have other sources that you're protecting.
Yeah, I just, until the stories are revealed, I just can't really address that.
Is it fair to say that you've heard from people inside the NSA or inside the government who have been inspired by Edward Snowden, who are also feeling uncomfortable with what's going on inside the government and also want to share information with you?
I definitely think it's fair to say that there are people who have been inspired by Edward Snowden's courage, and by the great good and virtue that it has achieved. And, I think there were people before Edward Snowden like Chelsea Manning and Thomas Drake, and before that Daniel Ellsberg, who were incredibly heroic. I think Edward Snowden was inspired by them. And I have no doubt that there will be other sources inside the government who see extreme wrongdoing who are inspired by Edward Snowden as well.
At the same time, I've gotten the sense that you want this new news organization that you're building with your colleagues to be broader than just what Edward Snowden has provided document-wise to you. Is that right, that you want to broaden out on this news site beyond what you wrote for The Guardian and for sources like NBC more recently?
Oh, definitely. I mean, before Edward Snowden was my source, I wrote about a whole range of topics, civil liberties abuses and secrecy abuses, inequality in the United States, and we're certainly going to continue to focus on issues like that, as well as broader issues. We have journalists who have been at the top of their field reporting on criminal and civil justice abuses and a whole variety of other topics. To us, what we're really about is this journalistic ethos that people in power, more than anything else, need adversarial checks from those in the media. That's why the First Amendment guarantees a free press. We believe that kind of transparency brings accountability, and that's really been missing from the American political class, which is why there's been so much, not just ineptitude, but corruption, and that's something that we hope to contribute to rectify.
You're coming to us from Brazil. You haven't been back to the United States since these first stories were published last summer, but you've hinted that you're going to come back this spring. And I want to bring that up because there's been claims in recent days from some government officials that they might hold you accountable and might try to prosecute you in some way. Let's play the exchange between the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, and the FBI director, James Comey, from earlier this week.
There have been discussions about selling of access to this material to both newspaper outlets and other places. Mr. Comey, to the best of your knowledge, is fencing stolen material, is that a crime?
Yes, it is.
And would be selling the access of classified material that is stolen from the United States government, would that be a crime?
It would be. It's an issue that can be complicated if it involves a news gathering, a news promulgation function, but in general, fencing or selling stolen property is a crime.
Glenn, your blood must boil when you hear that. What was your reaction to that? What do you think they're trying to do by saying those kind of things?
Extraordinary aspects to that attempt by Mike Rogers to suggest that journalists such as myself are engaged in criminal conduct or selling documents and the like. The first is that he's not only lying, and he is lying, but he not only is lying, but he knows that he's lying. This is what Mike Rogers is notorious for in Washington, is literally just making things up and smearing political opponents and journalists he doesn't like. He recently did it when he said that there was indications that Edward Snowden was working with Russian intelligence, and every major newspaper in the country said not only is there no evidence of that, but that investigators have said it's not the case, that he acted alone. But I defy Mike Rogers, if he wants to make that accusation, to come forward and present actual evidence that any journalist has sold documents or stolen material or engaged in any kind of criminality. He has no evidence. He's just making things up. But the second extraordinary aspect of it is that what he's talking about, that process has always in the United States been called journalism, where you go to media organizations when you have something to report, you get paid for your reporting, and then you report it what the public should know. What this is nothing less than an attempt to criminalize journalism, like all petty tyrants try to do when reporters and other journalists expose that which they want to hide. And I don't think anybody should mistake what this is really about.
And yet every time we talk, every time you're on television, people on Twitter call you a traitor. What is that like, to hear the word traitor at the same time you hear the word hero from other people?
Yeah, I think that it's always the case that if you are adversarial to the U.S. government, there are certain people who view criticizing the government or exposing bad acts that are done in secret of the government as being treasonous. If you go back and look at what was said about one of my political heroes, Daniel Ellsberg, who everybody now regards as a hero, but 40 years ago you had the Mike Rogers and James Clappers of that era calling him a Russian spy and a traitor and engaging in treason and endangering the United States. It's really just a very similar pattern. And I knew a long time ago when I went into journalism that it wasn't the profession to go into if you want to be universally loved. If you do it the right way, it means that you're going to make a lot of powerful people and their loyalists unhappy. And I'm perfectly okay with that.
Then I hope to see you here in New York in a couple of months.
Thanks very much, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.